Hi guys, welcome to today's episode. Let's talk more about Qigong. All right, first question. Let's see what we got. It's from episode 50, Passion and Purpose. It's from at ARQNAMQ. Okay. First question. Are those who meditate all day doing the same? Okay, I understand the context. On that episode, I was talking about how, in the West and also in modern Asia, everywhere around the world, they talk about finding your purpose, finding your passion. And nowadays, it's finally documented in neurology that that kind of thinking has its limits because if you examine top performers, whether it's in art or in music or in any domain, they get a peak experience called a flow state, or they just call it peak experience in psychology. That is an enormous amount of euphoria based on dopamine rush. Same as cocaine, basically. So you get high and then you crash afterwards, and then you need a higher spike, and then you crash, and then you chase even a higher high, and you spike. Eventually, around midlife, you crash to a point where you can't recover, which causes an enormous amount of anxiety and depression, and also an identity crisis. You see that a lot in ladies that are really hot, and then when they get older, they can't let go of the fact that they're not physically hot anymore, or guys that used to be tough, but then when they get older, they can't, they basically, I'm not the man I'm used to be. So this kind of midlife crisis thing kind of caused a lot of depression. Is bad because there's a fall. But if you're not a normal guy, the fall is from a lot higher. Because if you're a top performer, then you rise higher than the average guy. When you crash, you really crash hard. So please watch a previous episode, episode 5, on the playlist in the channel, so I don't have to go over the neurological factors and energetic factors based on this. So this gentleman's asking, for those who meditate all day or top performers and meditators, aren't they doing the same thing, this spike? The answer is no. Because when you're doing, like, for example, martial arts, that a background that I came from, then, you know, I used to train 6 days, 4 nights a week, and I had a time in my life. I got really high off it. And in my 20s and my 30s, up to my mid 40s, that's what I did. I just train. And it was a blast. And I was getting a huge dopamine hit off training all the time, just like someone doing cocaine, I guess, from a neurological point of view. And then around 45, I crashed to the point where I almost died. I had stage 4 overtraining syndrome. Depending on the doctor, they call it by different things. PTSD, they call it adrenaline fatigue, they call it chronic fatigue. My Again, you can watch a previous episode. The TCM doctors call it low chi. It went on, and East and West, both medicine couldn't fix me. Qigong is eventually what healed me, and that's why I'm doing this podcast to share it, right? So when I got into Qigong, eventually after the healing process, and it took me 2 years to completely fix myself. After that, in the last 3 years, in total, I've been doing it full time for 5 years. I actually been doing Qigong for 30 years, but full time for 5. So now I do it 2 to 4 hours a day. You also get this enormous bliss that is extremely hard to describe, but it's also euphoria, a peak experience, if you will. But it's not the same as martial art or playing sports or playing music or doing cocaine or anything like that because there's no up and down. It's not that kind of happiness. It's not excitement. It's not a dopamine hit followed by a crash. So it's not pleasure based because that's the nature of pleasure. Pleasure is based on dopamine, and dopamine is based on you get a reward or a high, and then what goes up must come down. So it's never everlasting happiness. Everything is temporary. Whether you buy a new house and you're happy, later on you're sick of it, or you fall in love and later on you fall out of love, or you're doing martial arts and now you get older, you have to quit, or whatever it is that makes you happy don't last. That's the idea in Buddhism and Taoism of the red dust, is a trick. So you're asking, is meditation the same? The answer is no, because the chemical circuit's different. When you get a bliss hit from a meditation or you enter bliss, it's based on stillness. It's based on serotonin and endorphins. It's not based on a chemical of dopamine, which is up and down. Endorphins and serotonin, basically, you enter stillness. So if you look at it like a graph, it's not up and down. When you enter bliss and emptiness, it's stillness. There's no up and down. It doesn't move. You enter this very peaceful stillness state. And because it doesn't move, it doesn't change. Because it doesn't change, there's no up and down and there's no crash. So I hope that helps you with that question. In fact, in an original scripture of Taoism, Nei Yi, it talked about how tranquility and peace is really important. It's equally important to let go of happiness and joy. That causes a lot of confusion because of the English word. So that sounds really confusing. He's like, don't be happy, don't be joyful. What are you talking about? But you have to examine it from a Chinese medicine or from a Taoist point of view. It's not saying joy is bad. It's saying the type of joy. The type that goes up and down is bad. It leads to a neurological crash. If you go too high, you must come down. But peace and tranquility and bliss and serotonin, that kind of bliss and euphoric feeling is good because that's not based on up and down. That's based on stillness, based on contentment, based on gratitude. We call it by many different names, but it's not like cocaine. It's not up and down. It's not pleasure seeking. It's bliss, contentment, and inner peace kind of feeling. It's equally blissful, but it's a different feeling. Yeah, that's the best I can describe it. For those that meditate regularly for hours a day, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But for those that never been there, you can describe it any way you like, but it's impossible to describe it to someone that hasn't really felt that, right? You felt yourself melting into the ground, the body you feel like it's dissolving, and then eventually you start going up, right? And you start seeing really bright. It gets really bright as soon as you close your eyes. When it comes back down in this area, you feel this enormous contentment and gratitude. It's probably the most effective thing that I've ever experienced or heard of for people with anxiety and depression. And it's free. So I don't know why people don't do it. Okay. Next question. At Raymond Rochad 6253. Hey, Raymond. Okay. It says, hi, Adam. I really appreciate the video. Thank you. I was wondering about something you said in another video about making peace with death. Wow, that's going to be a heavy one. Okay. You got me thinking, what is the Taoist view on dying, how it connects with non-doing practices and spirituality of Qigong? And in other words, how does a Taoist practice could help you cope with aging, disease, and grief? That's a very good question. It's actually the underlying reason for original Taoism. When I was studying the Heaven Bound tradition, I was talking about healing a lot. Like, hey, I want to get rid of my anxiety and depression. I want to be happy and heal my emotion. And my teacher, the person that showed me Heaven Bound, Steve, he was like, well, that's great. But Fook said, or the Grand Master of the system said, healing is actually just the basics. The whole point of healing is merging and learning how to die. I was like, oh. Because I remember when I was close to dying because I was so sick. And I talk about it for those that follow my work. It was bad. Like I was dizzy 24 hours a day. I was puking all the time. I was sick all the time. I couldn't think at all. I couldn't form complete sentences. I couldn't count to 20. My brain wasn't working. I couldn't walk 20 feet without puking, or I just couldn't make it. Sometimes I couldn't walk. Some days I was perfectly normal. Most of the time I was messed up. I went to Western medicine, nothing worked. Neurologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, MD, sport science medicine, post-concussion therapist, PTSD counseling. I'm probably forgetting a couple, but none of them could help me. Chinese medicine, acupuncture, acupressure, herbology, twin na, none of them can help me. So I was screwed. So qigong is what helped me, right? Around the time that this was all happening, it was most of the symptom I just described to you was purely physical. By year two, it got worse. It got to the point that it wasn't just the mental symptom that I was describing to you, but it's starting to have physical, emotional symptom. For the first time in my life, I experienced depression and anxiety. I didn't even know where it come from because I had nothing to be sad about, really. My life was the same as before I was sick. And then I was getting panic attacks 2 or 3 times a day. So it was getting really bad. I'm sitting there. Sometimes I have this urge to cry, or I'll cry and I wouldn't know why. For no reason. I'm just sitting there. So, and again, Eastern and Western medicine didn't work. So when I learned Qigong at first, my first urge was like emotional healing. Can I get rid of my anxiety and depression? And also physical healing. Can I get my physical health back. So those are my first two concerns, and so I thought. But the universe likes to play jokes on us. So here I am thinking, look, what I want is physical healing and emotional healing. At first, I was physically screwed. When it got worse, I got emotionally screwed. What I didn't predict is I got spiritually screwed after that. So you just kept getting worse. So at first, physically, I was screwed up. Then I had anxiety and depression. When it got worse, it was spiritual. I started had this unexplainable, don't know why, awe, sudden fear of death. Like it was plaguing my mind all the time. Maybe because I was about to die. That makes sense now. That I was like, oh, what happens if we die? I'm going to die. I don't mind the dying part, but what's going to happen afterwards? So this questions as old as man started to kind of poke at me, right? You started to scare the crap out of me 24 hours a day. Because most of us ignore it when we're healthy. We live like we're going to live forever, right? We act like we're the only ones around. We're constantly chasing materialistic stuff, ambitious stuff, vanity, vanity. So our whole society, culture is based on that. So being sick is really good because it wakes you up from that. And it makes you kind of go, okay, dying. Ooh, that's a big one. So you asked how Taoism is. But before I can answer that, we have to kind of now circle back to Taoist history because Taoism's take on death really depends on a dynasty that you're asking. If you look at Taoism in terms of a religion, it wasn't found to the late Han Dynasty, that's where you get Taoist priests, Taoist temples. It was officially called Taoism. The word Taoism and Taoist family actually didn't exist before Han Dynasty. That's an English word. So Taoism is a religion. If you look at it that way, dying is really concerned about the three layers, which mirrors Buddhism, because Taoism in Han Dynasty didn't start until Buddhism arrived in China and was so widespread, the Taoist tradition was afraid that Taoism would go extinct. So they decided to turn it into a religion. Before that, Taoism wasn't even a religion. So in the early Han Dynasty, it became a religion, and the cosmology that used to explain death mirrors Chinese Buddhism almost identical. And that is you have man, look at it as an ice cube, and then you have half melted ice cube, gooey, almost water, but not quite, half melted ice cube. That would be ghosts and spirits and gods and deities. And then you have fully melt ice cube back to the ocean. That would be, in Buddhism, we'll call it emptiness. In Taoism, they'll call it the Tao or the source or the One Qi or the Wu Qi. There's so many names for it. In Christianity, they'll call it Christ consciousness or divine light. In Native tradition, a lot of time they call it the Great Spirit. So Hinduism's Brahman, but it doesn't matter what names we call it. I like the Zen analogy for a communication's sake. You look at it like an ice cube, matter, and then you look at it like half melted ice cube, spirits and ghosts and whatever, and then you have fully melted ice cube where you're back in the ocean, right? So in quantum physics, there'll be 0 point energy, dark energy, the energy that made matter. So quantum physics talk about the first two, the ice cube, matter, and also pure ocean, pure energy that made matter. Quantum physics talk about that. It doesn't talk about the middle part, right? It doesn't, the half melted ice cube. But religion does. All religion does. So if you look at Han Dynasty Taoism, it talks about these three realms. And of course, you can break it down in mini realms, but for our convenience sake, we'll just call it ice cube, half melted ice cube, pure ocean, right? So that's how would Han Dynasty Taoism talk about it. Very close to Buddhism. But in original Taoism, what I practice, it really doesn't get obsessed with the half melted ice cube, the immortal body, or trying to live forever and all. That's Han Dynasty stuff. Original Taoism in the Zhou Dynasty was not a religion. They were not monks. They were not priests. They weren't villagers. They were mountain hermits. They're just a bunch of dudes who practice. And the main practice at that time was 100% non-doing, unlike the later Han Dynasty internal alchemy stuff, which is you climb a ladder, converting Jing to Qi, from Qi to Shin, and from Shin to the head, and then you finally get to merge to emptiness. Whereas in original Taoism, there's no stage, no technique, no chasing, no ladder to climb. You simply dissolve like an ice cube into the ocean on day one. There is no stages. Every day is the exact same thing, no new technique. But every time you do it is a complete different experience, exactly like Zen Buddhism. And all non-doing traditions the same. No new techniques, but new experience. So in original Taoism of the Zhou dynasty, which does non-doing, direct merging, or direct dissolving, the idea is you want to go, hey, half melted ice cube, get away from me. Your only goal is to go directly into the ocean, to hit emptiness, or nirvana, or Buddha nature, or Brahman, or Tao, or the Great Spirit, whatever you want to call it, or in quantum physics, the 0 point energy that's behind matter. Basically, you want to go back to the energy that made matter. So you don't really care about the middle ground, the ghosts and the spirit and the demons and the gods and the half melted ice cube. This being the case, in this direct merging process, I'm going to stop talking soon because there's no point talking about it any further unless you experience it. But if you merge and then you realize the ice cube has always, when the ice cube merges into the ocean, you start to realize the ice cube has always been water. And that's your original nature. You always were this light and energy. You can't die. I mean, the ice cube will die, it will melt, but the water doesn't. So when you start identifying with the water instead of the ice cube, you realize there's no death, but the ice cube dies. But you can't identify with the water if you haven't experienced it before. That's why Taoism is not a philosophy. It's a mystic path, just like Zen Buddhism, just like Hinduism. It's about practicing to the point where you merge. And that's the big difference between shamanistic practice that uses psychedelics versus, let's say, original Taoism or Zen Buddhism or Tibet Dochan or any of the meditative path that merges into emptiness. The biggest difference is usually in people that do psychedelics, they're kind of stuck in the middle realm with the half melted ice cube, not pure emptiness. Although I did meet a couple that said that they went all the way up with psychedelics, but it's very rare. So when you go into the pure stuff, emptiness, one of the phenomena you'll realize is there's a presence there. There's no form, there's no being, but there's presence there. It's not death, it's not unconscious. I'll leave you with that because if I go any farther, it's just speculation. Until you experience it, it has no meaning. But if you experience it, then death anxiety disappears. When I first experienced it, my death anxiety disappeared. So did everyone I talked to. But in my mind, not many people will sit to the point where they merge because that fear is not there, right? The only reason why I got there is not because I'm smart or I'm amazing in any way. No credit goes to me. It's just I was dying. So it triggered my death anxiety, what got me to the point where I was sitting 4 hours a day. And in the process, I got healed and solved that problem, right? And I want to underline this clearly. It's not a hobby. It never been popular or cool to do this merging process in the history of China. Being a Taoist has never been fashionable. That's why Datmo, the founder of Zen Buddhism, say, those who come to the Dharma come with great suffering. It's usually because you're either physically, mentally, or spiritually extremely sick and suffering. The pain is what motivates people to practice. So keep that in mind because it's not an easy process. It's actually a long process, right? So, and talking about it doesn't really help. That being said, I'll leave you with that. But if you get any more questions, you guys, please just leave it in a comment below. I love talking to you about it. Hope to see you guys in the Taoist community. Follow the links below if you want to learn the sitting, standing, moving meditation methods that I teach in the Taoist community. The main idea is to use the moving and standing practices for physical health in the lower burner, and all the sitting practices is for the emotional healing and the spiritual merging part. It's important to know this priority. Okay. Anyway, guys, have a good week. See you next time.